So it's been several weeks since the House has had a speaker, and so far Republicans are still fighting amongst themselves to try and pick an alternative to Kevin McCarthy ever since he was ousted a few weeks ago. Now, Jim Jordan seems to be the most likely contender, and as we're going to talk about in this video, he has been garnering a decent amount of support. The real question is, will it be enough, and will there be potential holdouts that could stop him from becoming speaker? And also, we're going to talk about what this means for the Republican Party going forward, because obviously the optics of not being able to pick a speaker for several weeks shows a lot of dysfunction. You know, the Republicans joined the Democrats to oust the Republican speaker, and to this day, we still don't have a speaker. Jordan seems like the most likely contender at this point, but obviously things could change. So we're going to analyze the current situation, what votes Jordan has, what votes he needs to flip in order to become speaker, and how this is going to impact the Republican Party going forward. So we're going to get to all of that in just a second. But first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. So Jim Jordan is a member of the Freedom Caucus. He's more of the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. And earlier on, there really wasn't that much momentum for him to become speaker. I mean, obviously you had other House Freedom Caucus members supporting him, but this time around, and especially because I think a lot of Republicans are very exhausted with the amount of chaos this whole ordeal has put upon the party and the country, a lot of Republicans have been falling in line to support Jordan. Now, even Kevin McCarthy, who was ousted, and again, Jim Jordan had supported Kevin McCarthy for speaker. He's always voted along with Kevin McCarthy, so those two obviously have a good working relationship. McCarthy's endorsement of Jordan, I think, is a big deal because this could sway a lot of the Republicans that wanted to support McCarthy's bid again, kind of gives them a reason to jump on ship and support Jordan. Because quite frankly, if Jordan is not chosen as the Speaker of the House, it's going to be very difficult to get a Republican speaker without getting Democratic votes. And obviously, for Republicans to get Democratic votes in a vote like this, they're going to need to make concessions. And that was something that McCarthy was unwilling to do, hence why he was ousted by all the Democrats collectively. So it really does create a very chaotic environment for Republicans. And we're just a few weeks away from important elections in Virginia, Mississippi, Kentucky. So the optics of this really aren't great. Also, you have the crisis going on in Israel and Palestine. So, you know, the Republicans are sort of seen by a lot of Americans as missing in action while they sort of sort out their internal infighting. Now, Jordan himself has been racking up the endorsements as of late. Again, I think McCarthy is a really big one, but he's been getting endorsements all over the political aisle. Steve Scalise, who was originally running to become speaker, dropped out once it was clear that he wouldn't have the support to actually make it to a floor vote with the entire House of Representatives. There were enough Republican holdouts. As of the writing of this article, Jordan had 152 votes. We're actually going to look at more recent numbers. He's got 162, so he's gained 10 more votes since then, or at least 10 more Republicans choosing to support him. Now, of course, the entire House of Representatives needs to vote for the Speaker of the House, not just Republicans. So Republicans having such a thin majority, they really need essentially the entire caucus to be united behind him. And so far, if we take a look at this map, which was created by Mr. Republican on Twitter, there's still 6 Republican holdouts against Jim Jordan, the most notable being, of course, Don Bacon in Nebraska second. Again, this is a Biden +7 district. Ken Buck, which is, you know, who's from a very safe Republican district. Rob Whitman in Virginia. And you've got a couple of others out there. So these are the main holdouts. Now, some of these holdouts have flipped. So you did have a number of Republicans saying they wouldn't support Jordan that now support Jordan. This CNN article from today highlights that Mike Rogers and Ken Calvert, who chair the House Armed Services Committee and House Appropriations Defense Subcommittee, respectively, have jumped on ship and supported Jordan, which basically means that Jordan probably has promised them what they want, which is basically more military funding, more border security, and consistent international support among American allies. Because, you know, Jordan has been much more hesitant to give countries like Ukraine money, for instance. That was one of the reasons why Kevin McCarthy was ousted in the first place, because the House Freedom Caucus thought that he was giving them too much money, wasn't meeting their demands. Jim Jordan is certainly more friendly to the Matt Gaetzes and the House Freedom Caucus members' positions, but I still think he's going to have a working relationship with these other Republicans, these more establishment Republicans, who are obviously going to look to the Speaker of the House to give them what they want in terms of national defense, foreign aid, etc. Now, obviously, Jim Jordan's going to be a more conservative speaker than Kevin McCarthy if he is elected. And Kevin McCarthy was miles more conservative than Paul Ryan and John Boehner, and those two weren't ousted. So it goes to show you that Kevin McCarthy is dealing with a much more hostile House Freedom Caucus, a House Freedom Caucus that is unwilling to back down from its positions, good, bad, or indifferent. They've been much more adamant about holding the line, whereas in the past, with Boehner and Paul Ryan, you really didn't have that. There was no real attempts to actually remove them. Boehner almost got removed. That's one of the reasons he stepped down. The House Freedom Caucus was responsible for that, but he never was actually officially removed. Again, Kevin McCarthy was the first Speaker of the House to ever be removed, ever, by a vote in the House of Representatives. So it really was historic. And, we're still dealing with the power vacuum of that to this day. Again, like I said, you have the crisis going on in Ukraine. You've got Israel, Palestine, all these moments where you need a Speaker of the House to actually potentially pass important legislation to address those concerns. You don't have it when you don't have a Speaker of the House. Now, the vote for Speaker is expected to occur soon. That's why you're seeing more and more Republicans sort of galvanize around Jim Jordan. It's interesting to see the type of coalition he's putting together. Representative Ann Wagner of Missouri, who originally said Jordan was a non-starter for Speaker, now says she supports him. You've got, if we take a look at that map I pulled up earlier, you've got a number of representatives in more moderate districts. D'Esposito in New York's 4th, which is a Biden plus 18, I believe. You've got Mike Lawler in a blue district in upstate New York, who's a more moderate Republican. He's supporting Jim Jordan. You've got essentially almost the entire New York delegation, which is more on the more moderate side of the political spectrum. And you've got a number of other undecideds. You've got Fitzpatrick in Pennsylvania's 1st, which if he's able to jump on ship with Jim Jordan, I think the vast majority of other Republicans will as well. Again, Jordan really can't afford to have even these 6 holdouts. He really can afford maybe just 1 or 2, because obviously the entire House Democratic caucus is going to vote against him. So he really needs to have every single Republican vote possible in order to win the speakership. And of course, with that, we'll probably have one of the most conservative speakers, certainly in recent American history. Again, he's more aligned with the Trump wing of the party, so you could imagine that you're going to see a lot of those priorities. And obviously, this would be encouraging to Donald Trump if Jim Jordan is the speaker, because if he is president, he's going to have a much more friendly House of Representatives to back him. Now, what's interesting in this whole process is, unlike with Kevin McCarthy, where you had the House Freedom Caucus as the holdouts, you now have the more moderate Republicans as the holdouts. And it looks like they're trying to jump on board with Jim Jordan because, quite frankly, there's no other viable alternative. The only other viable alternative at this point in time is probably going to be a more moderate Republican, somebody like Don Bacon, Fitzpatrick, who would need Democratic votes to get over the finish line, because you already know you're not going to have the Gateses of the party, potentially the Boeberts of the party, which, funny enough, Boebert didn't even vote against McCarthy either. So even though she's much more conservative, she didn't even go up against McCarthy. So, you're going to have to deal with holdouts really any way you look at it. But so far, the map is coming together for Jim Jordan. Obviously, Jim Jordan is going to be a big target for Democrats. He's one of the most controversial members of the House. Obviously, he's associated with the MAGA wing of the party, so that has its own baggage with him. Kevin McCarthy, like him or hate him, wasn't really that unpopular or popular with the American public. He was much more of a low-profile speaker than somebody like Nancy Pelosi or Paul Ryan was. And Nancy Pelosi had a massive edge over Kevin McCarthy because she could actually keep her coalition together. The Democratic caucus was in the very narrow majority after the 2020 elections, and yet with all the Democrat support, Democrats were still able to pass key legislation. And sometimes they would get a few Republican votes here or there, but she was able to get the entire Democratic caucus, the most moderate members, the Jared Goldens of the party, and obviously the most progressive members, the AOCs, the Cori Bushes, on the exact same page. So that's a testament to Nancy Pelosi's just immense power and political prowess, something that the Republicans have yet to replicate. Again, obviously Kevin McCarthy was the complete opposite of that, since he failed to really hold the Republicans together at all. And again, it took 15 votes for Kevin McCarthy to even become speaker in the first place. That just goes to show you how chaotic the Republican Party is at this point in time. The Democratic Party, in comparison, is much more organized, much more disciplined. The entire caucus is on the same page. Hakeem Jeffries has only been the leader of the Democratic Party in the House for a short amount of time, and he already has a much stronger grip on the party than Kevin McCarthy ever did, and potentially Jim Jordan as well. Even if Jim Jordan is voted Speaker of the House, he's still going to have to work with much more moderate members of the caucus. But it is encouraging for him that you have a number of representatives in pretty blue districts. Mike Lawler, as I mentioned, D'Esposito, Lolota in New York's 1st. These are more moderate centrist Republicans who really wouldn't endorse somebody like Jordan unless they were going to get something out of it, and unless they really were tired of all the Republican infighting, because quite frankly, it's definitely a bad look for the nation as a whole when the Republican Party is still unable to pick a speaker after several weeks, especially during a time of immense crisis when a lot of Americans are looking for leadership. And obviously the House Republicans want to prove that they can govern effectively with the Democrats to address these challenges. But obviously so far no legislation is going to get through the House as long as there's no speaker. So obviously Republicans are really hinging on Jordan being successful in this effort, or at least some Republican with as much clout to actually get a quick vote, to get a quick speaker, because as of right now, obviously McHenry's the acting speaker, but he really hasn't been doing anything because Republicans haven't been able to, or the House in general hasn't been able to work until there's actually a real speaker put in charge that can pass real legislation. So as for the impact on the races in November, it's unclear. I just think it's certainly a bad look that Republicans can't pick a leader after this long period of time. And it just shows that, you know, a contrast to the Democrats, who are very strategic and disciplined in this moment, while Republicans are in complete disarray and sort of in this factionalization period. So we'll see how this plays out, if there's really a big impact. You know, voters are obviously paying attention. Voters obviously are aware that Republicans are sort of in this disarray. But hopefully for the Republicans, something will come out of it, and perhaps they'll have a more cohesive message going into 2024. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.